Okay, we're just gonna ignore what I did with my eyeliner. we're gonna ignore what I did with my eyeliner. Wow, that's big. Those wings are big. We're gonna ignore that. We're just gonna pretend like this didn't happen, okay? Okay. Hello and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for being here today. I would like to talk once again about dungeons because I have completed my dungeon. Well, we're about to complete the dungeon at my table. And I decided that it'd be super fucking cool to give you something directly from my table. Okay, so basically what happened is last time I talked about dungeons and how we should bring back dungeons, a player at my table said they never experienced one. So I was like, okay, I'm going to start making dungeons. So I made my first dungeon, which was the druid kind of dungeon. Whenever I then posted that dungeon, somebody said that they don't like dungeons because dungeons are boring. And that they said that dungeons lack any sort of personality and you're simply going from room to room fighting the next monster or the equivalent thing. And they called it acoustic video games. Now, I heard acoustic video games and I heard their complaint and I said, okay, I can totally understand where you are coming from. If your person that is making your dungeons is bad at making your dungeons, because whenever I think of dungeons, the quintessential dungeon that comes up in my head is the Sunless Citadel, which is just an entire dungeon like in a little capsule, right? I think of the Sunless Citadel and I was never bored in the Sunless Citadel, right? Like I was always thrilled to be there and thrilled to be figuring out what the fuck was going down. And every room had something interesting in it and the hallways had interesting in it. I was never bored. I never thought of it as acoustic video games where you're just walking into the next room and fighting the next thing. So what to me made the Sunless Citadel such an amazing thing is that each room had a purpose. Each room had a thing. Each room had a description. Each room had a thing. Each room was individual and unique in the sense that you knew what that purpose of that room was. You knew, even if it was hundreds of years old, you knew why that room had that stuff in that time, you know? And I think that that is incredibly important to dungeons, is to remember that these places were once alive and populated, or are still alive and populated, and very much need to reflect that. Now, of course, there's a little bit of finagling that needs to happen whenever it comes to the direction in which people take in a dungeon, such as going into certain rooms to make sure they get certain items, to go into other rooms to make sure that they unlock those things with the items that they previously got, or just to make sure they don't bum rush the boss instead of actually going through all of the rooms and getting all the magic items to bum rush the boss, right? There's a lot of preparation. Dungeons are kind of hard. That's what I came up with. That's what the whole thing was. Dungeons were kind of hard. So as I walked into this survey, this moment, this idea about something that I had made and something that I was advocating for, I wanted to challenge it. I wanted to make an interesting dungeon. I wanted to make a dungeon that had a purpose, that was captivating, that was, you know, overall more important than just walk into the room and hit things. So I did. And I actually ran this dungeon at my own table. That's where I took it from. My own fucking table. So as of the day that I'm filming this right now, my players are in the boss room of this dungeon fighting the literal boss of this dungeon that I literally put in the PDF. So I'm very, very excited to tell you that we have done the majority of the dungeon, and actually it was a success, I would say. Everyone had a lot of fun. Everyone met interesting characters and ended up having a lot of interesting things to say. I really focused on making the descriptors more in-depth in this PDF, so that you would be able to just read directly off of what was on this PDF. And essentially, I tried to make something that was more interesting and just iterate on the idea of dungeons not necessarily being interesting and correcting that. I also want to say that I played this dungeon IRL, and I'm not going to lie, I have never played a dungeon IRL. All my IRL stuff has been very, like, one-off fighting kind of stuff, theater of the mind kind of fighting. I've never really done a straight-up dungeon, and so I did something I thought long and hard. This was actually probably the hardest part of the entire dungeon, was to think about how I would translate the dungeon over to my players. And what I ended up doing, I thought was really fun, and I want to share with you, and hopefully then you guys can go and play dungeons at your tables and also be able to have a lot of fun with it. So the way that we did it, that everybody enjoyed it, is I didn't touch the map. I didn't create the map, I didn't touch the map, I didn't draw the map, I didn't do anything that had to do with the map. The player characters and the players were responsible for mapping the dungeon and keeping track of where they were in the dungeon. All what I was doing was telling them the room is this many squares by this many squares, northeast, southwest, it turns, there's a hallway, it's lit, it's not lit. That's what I was in charge of. I was in charge of telling them the logistics, and they were in charge of keeping track of those logistics once they were said. And it was actually a lot of fun, I'm not gonna lie, because I do have a lot of artists at my table. Once I said, you're keeping track of the dungeon, just like you would if you were in this dungeon, you are keeping track of where you've been and where you're going. They were like, okay, hang on, I have to get a sketchbook, and I had to do this, and I had to do that, and do you want to do this? And like, they ended up formulating betwixt themselves a plan of how to use the map and also keep track of the map by drawing on graph paper. And fucking graph paper, do you guys remember that stuff? I love graph paper, and I actually ended up having graph paper on hand for them to use, and it was just so much fun. And so I would really highly recommend, if you're going to do this dungeon IRL, if you're going to do this dungeon on the computer, dynamic lighting, I guess dynamic lighting. Have fun drawing all of those walls. But if you're doing this in person, I would highly recommend doing dungeons with them keeping track of the dungeon, them drawing the dungeon, and you just editing it to make it congruent with your dungeon. Or also, sometimes I would draw, like, there are tables here, or like there's like, no, the door goes over here, just to make sure that we're all on the same map and everyone's communicating effectively. But yeah, that was probably my favorite thing that I did. And I'm definitely, whenever I do the dungeon next, I am definitely going to do that again. They are going to keep track of it, just like they would if they were in a dungeon in real life. You got to keep track of where you are so you don't get lost. So I thought it was a lot of fun. Also, this is definitely one of those times where I would absolutely adore if people could give me feedback. The more, the better. The more critical, the better, honestly. I am not a little pansy. I can absolutely take some constructive criticism. And I need constructive criticism on this because this is a skill that I'm trying to build. I am currently trying to iterate on my previous dungeon and making it more and making it better and making it, like, interesting. And so this is a work in progress for me. This is definitely a skill that I do not personally have right now. I'm trying to build this skill. So if you're from the fucking 80s and you the 90s and you know how to build dungeons that are interesting and captivating, and like maybe you have some place that you reference for traps, would be really nice. Traps are something that I struggle with, and puzzles are another thing that I struggle with. If you have some book from the 80s that have traps and puzzles in them, I would gladly go on eBay and purchase a copy. I still own 3.5 books to reference whenever it comes to lore and interesting ideas, because a lot of the ideas of 3.5 didn't translate into 5e or didn't get put into 5e, but they translate into 5e very, very well and kind of dial back the amount of like high fantasy that is in 5e and what 5e wants to be. It makes it more, I go mid fantasy. I'm very like middle of the road. I don't know. I've given my players one magic item and they're level 7. They're level 7. I would also just like to throw out there that this is the first loot letter that I actually don't feel super confident about. I know I ran it at my own table, but my own table had a lot of tweaks and a lot of differences, and things that I couldn't really convey in just the little amount of space that I had, that I felt like I had to include with the dungeon on PDF. And so I might like reiterate on this dungeon again and like try to make this dungeon again, but even better and even closer to what I did IRL, because IRL was really fun and everybody had a lot of fun, but I still feel very, I don't know, insecure about dungeons, and I still feel very insecure about fights. And so I'm hoping that somebody can give me some resources or clue me into some way that can kind of be better. Anyways, if you want to see the PDF of what I'm talking about to get like a better idea what resources I need or what level I'm at with dungeon making, all the stuff is in the doobly-doo down below. It is on Substack, and if you want to subscribe, that's really fucking cool. But also, if you just want to get the PDFs, I really don't blame you. Okay, that is gonna be all for me today. I super duper appreciate you being here. I super duper appreciate you supporting me, and hopefully we can get to 1,000 followers soon. That would be really, really cool. But I will see you in the next video. You're always welcome at my table. Goodbye.